I almost didn't go to my own retirement party. That sounds strange, I know. It was my party. My colleagues had booked the private dining room at Sycamore Grill 3 weeks in advance. My wife had driven 40 minutes into the city that morning to pick up the cake herself. Lemon with cream cheese frosting, because she remembered what I liked even when I'd forgotten to tell her. 32 years at the same firm, and they wanted to send me off right. I should have been excited. But my son-in-law had been CC'd on the invitation email, and whenever Leonard was included in something, things had a way of going sideways. I want to be fair about this. I've tried to be fair about Leonard from the beginning. When my daughter first brought him home, she was 27, he was 31, already a junior partner at a commercial real estate firm in Charlotte. I made a genuine effort. He was polished, confident in the way that certain men are confident when they've never really been told no. He had the kind of handshake that's just a half second too firm, the kind that's making a statement rather than a greeting. But I told myself, my daughter loves him. That's what matters. People are complicated. Give it time.
My wife, Pauline,
Had her doubts earlier than I did. She's like that. She picks up on things I miss, the small moments, the ones that don't make it into the story when you retell it later. She noticed the way Leonard would slightly redirect a conversation back to himself. The way he laughed at my daughter's jokes just a beat too late, like he had to decide whether they were worth laughing at first. But she kept those observations to herself, mostly, because she knew how much our daughter, I'll call her my daughter the whole way through, because this story isn't really about her name, how much she loved him. They got married in the fall, 2 years after they met. It was a nice wedding, tasteful. Leonard's family had money, and they weren't shy about spending it, which meant the venue was beautiful, and the food was excellent, and the whole event had this polished, curated quality that felt more like a magazine spread than a family celebration. Pauline wore the blue dress she'd been saving for something important. She looked beautiful. I told her so in the parking lot before we went in, and she laughed and said, "Don't let me cry before we even get to the ceremony." We made it through the ceremony fine. The reception was where things started to show their shape. Leonard's best man gave a toast that was really more of a Leonard highlight reel. His college lacrosse record, his first big real estate deal, the time he closed a contract while on vacation in Sedona. My daughter was mentioned twice, briefly, like a supporting character in her own wedding story. I watched her smile through it. She was good at that. She'd gotten good at making herself smaller in spaces where Leonard filled the room. Then Leonard stood up to speak. He thanked his parents. He thanked his college friends. He thanked his business partner. He thanked the venue coordinator by name. He thanked what felt like every individual person who had ever been kind to him between 1989 and that Saturday afternoon in October. And then near the end, almost as an afterthought, he said, "And of course, thanks to Pauline and Richard for being here and for raising the woman I married." That was it, for being here. Like we were acquaintances who'd driven a moderate distance. Like we hadn't been the ones who stayed up with her through 2 separate health scares in college, who helped her pack and unpack 3 apartments, who had loved her before she knew how to say our names. Pauline's hand found mine under the table. She didn't say anything, she just held on. I told myself it was just poor speech writing, that Leonard was nervous, that he wasn't good at this kind of thing. I told myself a lot of things that night. What I didn't know yet was that the night had more to offer. Pauline had gone to the restroom. This was maybe an hour into the reception. People were dancing, the mood had loosened up, and I was standing near the bar talking to my old college roommate, who'd driven up from Savannah just for the event. We were mid-conversation when I saw it happen. My daughter-in-law, Leonard's mother, a woman named Beverly who had never particularly warmed to us but had always been civil, was saying something to Pauline near the entrance to the hallway. I couldn't hear it from where I stood, but I could see Pauline's face change. And then Beverly reached out and grabbed Pauline's wrist, not gently. "The way you grab someone when you want them to understand something," she said, and I found out the exact words later, from Pauline, who repeated them quietly in our hotel room that night while I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to keep my face neutral. She said, "You need to understand your place in this family now. Leonard is the center of her life, not you. If you can't accept that, you should think very carefully about how much of yourself you insert into their lives going forward." She released Pauline's wrist, smoothed her dress, and walked back toward the dance floor, like she'd just commented on the centerpieces. I didn't know any of this when it happened. What I saw was my wife returning to the table with her chin slightly elevated, and her expression very, very still. I've been married to Pauline for 34 years. I know what that face means. It means she is holding herself together with considerable effort and would prefer not to discuss it here. I didn't push. We made it through the rest of the reception. We drove back to the hotel, and then she told me. I remember sitting very still while she talked. I remember my hands being flat on my knees. I remember thinking that there were several things I could do right now and that none of them would actually help. I don't want you to do anything, Pauline said before I could speak. Not tonight. Not yet. So I didn't. That was the first moment I made a choice that my gut was screaming against. It would not be the last. The months after the wedding settled into an uneasy kind of normal. We saw the kids every 6 weeks or so. Sunday dinners at their house in Dilworth, or holiday gatherings where Leonard held court, and my daughter poured wine and made sure everyone had enough to eat. Beverly and her husband attended most of these, and Beverly was always perfectly cordial to Pauline in that particular way that very controlled people are cordial. Not warmth, exactly, but the performance of propriety. Pauline never brought up the wrist incident to Leonard or my daughter. I asked her once why not, and she said, because what would happen? Leonard would minimize it, Beverly would deny it, and our daughter would be stuck in the middle. So what's the point? I didn't have an answer. What I did was watch. I started paying attention differently to the way Leonard spoke about Pauline in passing, always slightly diminishing, always wrapped in a compliment so it was hard to pin down. Your mom means well, she just doesn't always read the room. Pauline's very sweet, she's just a little much sometimes. Delivered casually, almost gently, as if he were sharing a kind observation. I started noticing the way my daughter's eyes would flicker toward Leonard before she responded to us. A split-second check. Like she was waiting to see whether it was okay to be enthusiastic about something we'd said. I noticed how our invitations to things narrowed over the 2 years following the wedding. First, it was just the bigger family events, the ones where Leonard's side dominated. Then it was milestone dinners, birthday celebrations, a trip to Asheville they'd taken with 4 other couples, where we weren't mentioned until they were already back. I don't think my daughter always realized it was happening. I think she was swimming in water that had been gradually heated without her noticing. This is the part of the story that's hardest to explain to people who haven't lived it. There's no single moment you can point to. There's no one incident that justifies changing the whole equation. It's accumulation. It's 100 small adjustments that you each make, separately, and then one day you look at the distance between you and your child, and you can't quite trace how it got that far. I started drafting a letter around that time. Not to send, just to write. It's something I've done since I was young. When I needed to get my thoughts straight, I'd write out what I wanted to say, and usually that was enough. I didn't need to actually say it. I have legal pads going back decades with letters I never mailed, but this letter was different. This one I finished and folded and put in the lockbox in my home office. I wasn't sure yet what it was for. The retirement party was in March. I'd been at the firm for 32 years, started as a junior analyst right out of Virginia Tech, worked my way up through the kinds of incremental promotions that feel significant in the moment and obvious in retrospect. By the time I left, I was managing a team of 14 and overseeing client relationships that had been with the firm for a decade or more. It wasn't glamorous work. It was the kind of work you have to actually care about to do well. I cared about it. I was proud of it. The party was a Thursday evening. Sycamore Grill, the private room, about 40 people, colleagues, some clients I'd known for years, a few friends Pauline had added to the list. My daughter and Leonard were coming. We told them about it 2 months in advance. My daughter had texted me 3 separate times, saying she was excited. The first 90 minutes were genuinely lovely. My colleague Marcus, a colleague I'd worked with for 12 years, gave a toast that was so unexpectedly moving that I had to look at the ceiling for a moment to keep myself together. Pauline sat next to me and kept squeezing my hand. People told stories I'd half forgotten and some I'd buried on purpose. The room felt warm. It felt like something real. Leonard arrived 45 minutes late. He came in mid-toss during a story my former supervisor was telling, and rather than wait at the edge of the room, he and my daughter came directly to the table. He pulled out a chair. It scraped on the floor. A few people glanced over. He didn't seem to notice. He ordered a drink before sitting down fully. He scanned the room the way he always did, taking inventory, assessing. Then he leaned over to my daughter and said something that made her glance toward me with a slightly pained expression. I caught it. She looked away. The toasts continued. There were a few more funny ones, generous ones. Then the room's attention settled and people began to move and mingle, and the formal part wound down. I was talking to two former clients near the window when I realized Pauline had been gone for a few minutes. I found her in the small corridor outside the private room, by the coat rack. Beverly wasn't there this time. This time it was Leonard. I came around the corner and stopped. He hadn't seen me yet. He was standing with his arms crossed, and he was talking to Pauline in a low voice with that particular tone he used when he wanted something to land quietly. He said, and I heard this myself, I was close enough, he said, "You know Richard's going to want to be very involved now that he's retired. Just something to think about. It'll be important for you both to find things that give you purpose, that are yours. Not theirs," he said. "Theirs the way you'd say theirs about neighbors you were politely hoping would relocate." Pauline's back was to me. I couldn't see her expression, but I could see her posture, that same controlled stillness from the wedding reception. And something in me just settled. Not rage. That's the thing people don't understand. It wasn't hot. It was cold. It was the feeling of a decision clicking into place. I stepped back around the corner. I went back to the window. I talked to my former clients for another 20 minutes, and I laughed when I was supposed to. And I accepted a second glass of wine, and I told myself, not tonight. Tonight I'm going to finish this evening with my wife, and I'm going to drive us home, and I'm going to let her tell me what he said, and then I'm going to open the lockbox. The drive home took about 25 minutes. Pauline was quiet for most of it, which I'd expected. About 10 minutes from the house, she said, "He told me you're going to smother them now that you don't have work." "I heard," I said. She turned and looked at me. "You were there?" "Just the end." She was quiet again. Then, he said it like he was doing me a favor. Like he was giving me advance warning. "I know, Richard." Her voice was careful. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to think," I said. "And then I'm going to make one phone call." I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the dark and went through things carefully, the way I'd learned to do over 32 years of work that required you to weigh options and consider consequences before you moved. I thought about what I wanted the outcome to be, not what I wanted to say, what I wanted the outcome to be. By about 4 in the morning, I had it. Here's the thing about Leonard that I hadn't fully articulated to myself until that night. He had always believed, at some level, that the influence he had over my daughter was total. That whatever ground he had covered, whatever distance he had put between her and us, was permanent. He had the comfort of someone who has won quietly and doesn't expect anyone to have noticed. What he didn't know was that I had spent 32 years building something. Not just a career. Relationships. The kind of professional relationships that take decades and considerable integrity to develop. One of those relationships was with a man named Philip Sorrento, who had been a client of mine for 14 years, and who also, as it happened, sat on the board of the real estate investment consortium that was, at that moment, finalizing a major commercial development deal in which Leonard's firm had been positioned as a key leasing partner. Philip and I had breakfast every few months. We'd become genuine friends over the years, past the professional category. He was the kind of person who asked how Pauline was doing and remembered the answer next time. I called him on a Friday morning. I didn't misrepresent anything. I didn't exaggerate or fabricate. I simply told him that I had some concerns, personal ones, about a particular professional situation, and that I wanted to share my honest perspective with him as a friend, not an advisor. And then I told him, factually and calmly, about the pattern I had observed over 2 years, about a son-in-law who had systematically worked to reduce his wife's family's presence in her life, who had approached my wife at our daughter's wedding and told her to understand her place, who had cornered my wife at my retirement dinner to warn her not to become too involved in their lives. I told Philip that this was a person with a pattern of behavior that involved subtle control and manipulation, and that I thought he should know who he was doing business with. Philip was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I appreciate you telling me this, Richard. That was all. I didn't ask him to do anything. I didn't suggest any action. I made no demands. I just shared what I knew with someone who had the context and the judgment to decide what to do with it." 3 weeks later, Leonard's firm was quietly removed from consideration for the leasing partnership. I don't know the specific details of what Philip said or did. I don't need to know. What I know is that the deal, which Leonard had described to my daughter as the biggest opportunity of his career, which he had been counting on, planning around, building his next 5 years upon, did not happen. I found out through my daughter. She called on a Tuesday evening, upset, confused. She said Leonard had come home from a meeting and wouldn't talk to her and had been in his office for hours. She said something had fallen through with the Charlotte deal. She didn't know the details. I listened. I said I was sorry to hear it. I asked how she was doing. She said, I feel like something's been off with him for a while. Like there's a version of him I'm not getting to see. I said, carefully, have you ever felt like you had to check with him before you responded to people? Before you were enthusiastic about something? A pause. Why would you say that? She said. Because I've noticed it, I said, and because I think you might have too, somewhere. Another pause. Longer. Dad, she said. What's going on? Not about Philip, not about the deal. That wasn't the part she needed to hear yet. I told her about the wrist, about the wedding reception, about Beverly grabbing Pauline and telling her to know her place. I told her what Leonard had said in the corridor at my retirement dinner. I told her about the narrowing invitations, the small diminishments, the way she'd learned to make herself smaller. I told her all of it slowly, because I wanted her to hear it and not just process it. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, Mom knew about Beverly this whole time? Yes. Why didn't she tell me? Because she didn't want you to be caught in the middle. I heard her breath, unsteady. I need to talk to Mom, she said. I know, I said. She'd like that. There is a version of this story where Leonard apologizes and understands and changes and everyone rebuilds something better. I've thought about that version. I don't know if it's this story. What I know is that the week after that phone call, my daughter drove to our house on a Wednesday afternoon without telling Leonard. She sat at our kitchen table for 3 hours. And Pauline made coffee, and then tea, and then coffee again. And they talked in the way they hadn't talked in probably 2 years. Without the half-second delay, without the sideways glance, without the careful management of what was safe to say. Leonard texted me that evening. It said, we should talk. I texted back, agreed. When you're ready. He hasn't set a time yet. That's okay. I'm not in a rush anymore. I spent 32 years learning that the outcomes at last are the ones you build patiently, that the most important moves are often the ones you make when no one's watching. Pauline asked me, the night after our daughter's visit, whether I felt good about what I'd done. I thought about that for a while. I feel like I waited long enough, I said. And then I stopped waiting. She nodded. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine, the same way she had at the wedding reception when Leonard thanked us for being there. The difference was that this time, I wasn't holding myself still. I wasn't waiting for the evening to end. I was just sitting at my own kitchen table with my wife in a house we'd paid off 17 years ago, with the particular quiet that comes after a long thing finally moves. That was enough. For now, that was enough.